From Washington, D.C., I'm Allister. This is Washington Watch, a weekly roundup of the biggest stories from the United States and beyond. A massive victory for the Trump administration. The Supreme Court has issued a partial ban on birthright citizenship. The Supreme Court did not, however, make any decision on if Trump's move to end birthright citizenship is unconstitutional. Administration insists Iran's nuclear program has been obliterated, derailed by decades, but a leaked Pentagon report says otherwise. President Trump says U.S.-Iran talks could resume next week. Iran's foreign minister says Tehran has no such plans.
President Trump created the conditions to end the war, decimating, choose your word, obliterating, destroying Iran's nuclear capabilities.
In an exclusive interview to NDTV, U.S. Congressman Ami Bera says he does not think U.S. strikes on Iran set back Tehran's nuclear program by decades. Bera is a member of the U.S. House Intelligence Committee.
Whether it was set back months or years, I don't think it was set back decades. Let's put it that way.
President Trump hints at a very big trade deal coming up with India. New Delhi has been in talks with Washington to avoid hefty U.S. tariffs that could be slapped onto Indian goods in about 10 days. Meanwhile, without providing any sort of details, Trump says a trade deal with China has already been signed.
Having some great deals. We have one coming up, maybe with India, very big one, where we're going to open up India.
And a scramble in the Senate by Republicans looking to pass Trump's big, beautiful bill. Things have stalled after parliamentarian Elizabeth McDonough said that the bill violates rules. McDonough has objected to cuts on health benefits and other things. Some Republicans are calling for her to be fired or be ignored, going against what's usually been the norm. All right, in breaking news that's just come in the last 20 minutes or half an hour or so, critical U.S. Supreme Court ruling which grants a partial ban on birthright citizenship. The latest Supreme Court ruling is, remember, not a decision on whether Trump has the authority to end birthright citizenship. It made no mention of that or ruled on that. Rather, it's instead a ruling about how lower courts whether lower courts have that power to stop Trump from implementing his ban on birthright citizenship across the United States. Now, the Supreme Court has said that, issued that ruling that limits really those powers, that injunction power. Now, just for some background here, 3 lower courts stopped Trump's plans with a nationwide injunction. The Trump administration then went to the Supreme Court saying that lower courts can't issue blanket nationwide bans. Now, birthright citizenship means that every child born in the United States automatically becomes a U.S. citizen, irrespective of the parent's nationality. Trump, of course, wanting to end birthright citizenship and putting in an executive order on that front. Let's try and get more on the story, try and understand what exactly the Supreme Court has said. For more on this breaking story, I'm joined by Hiba Anver. She's an attorney at Erickson Immigration Group in Arlington, Virginia. Hiba, thank you so much for joining us here on NDTV. If you could tell us exactly, what does the Supreme Court say about injunctions?
So essentially, the Supreme Court held that a federal judge's ability to issue a nationwide injunction was no longer as expansive as it has been in the past. In other words, basically, the Supreme Court narrowed the scope of nationwide injunctions that are imposed by judges so that the injunctions now only apply to an individual or a group or a state that sues. So in other words, if you apply this ruling to the executive order on birthright citizenship, it basically means that the birthright citizenship executive order can move forward in states, even if the state has challenged it to a certain extent, depending on whether or not an individual or a group sues.
So just for a hypothetical understanding of this, if there was an Indian couple that sued against Trump's order, then they would essentially be protected. These are Indian couples who would be here on a temporary work permit, for example, but that would not necessarily apply to everyone else who are not part of that lawsuit. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And I think the operative words here are if the couple chooses to sue and if they're ultimately successful. What the concern as a result of this ruling is that this is now going to create a situation where individual couples or individuals or groups have to engage in individualized litigation, as opposed to the ability of a federal judge issuing a nationwide universal injunction and stopping something that the judge feels is unconstitutional through one limited action. So I think the best illustration of that would be if you think
Right.
about an H-1B visa holder in the US who happens to be pregnant. If the pregnant H-1B visa holder wants to challenge the birthright citizenship executive order, she would actually have to sue individually or join a class action.
But Hiba, wouldn't that create a lot of confusion across the United States with all these individual cases, either individually or class action?
That's definitely one of the concerns. The scenario that is potentially created now is significant logistical administrative burden, as well as, quite honestly, additional bureaucratic burden on the part of the government, because now the government has to go through additional steps in order to verify, the citizenship of the child that's born in the United States. If there's going to be a set of parents who are claiming birthright citizenship for their child, there's going to be additional documentation or information that now needs to be provided, but also subsequently verified. So there is definitely potential for quite a bit more burdensome administrative, but also bureaucratic burden.
Right. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here and sifting through these details that have just come in, giving us clarity on that as well. Now, let's get across to Raymond Victory. He's represents the Democratic side of things. Raymond, you've heard that. You've heard what's come in from the Supreme Court. Your immediate reactions to what you've heard?
Well, thanks very much for having me. My immediate reaction is that this is of a piece of President Trump's attempt to change the constitutional method of government in the United States. We've had a system of checks and balances for almost 250 years, and that is that the executive is not supreme, but is constrained by the judicial branch and the legislative branch. President Trump obviously wants to change that. He wants to make it more of an authoritarian approach to government. So one of the ways in which you do that is to attack the courts. You attack the courts on decisions that you want to try to weaken their powers. The 14th Amendment, which requires birthright citizenship, is plain in the United States Constitution. The Supreme Court did not have the chutzpah, if you will, gumption, to try to attack that directly. So what they've done is to try to attack it indirectly and to weaken the power of the courts through this decision. It is of a piece of what the majority conservatives are willing to do, and that is to try to placate Trump and his administration around the edges procedurally while not taking on the obvious
Right.
substantive question.
Raymond, thank you for your reactions there. We also would like to get some sort of reaction coming in from the Republican side of things. We have Puneet Ahluwalia joining us now. He represents the Republican Party. He's a Republican strategist. Puneet, clearly the Democrats unhappy about this, seeing this as a big blow. And surely you see this as a huge step forward for Trump, especially with those numerous injunctions that have come, not just on birthright citizenship, but in other things as well. For example, Trump's immigration crackdown.
Well, I'm glad President Trump has this victory. It's needed because what he's trying to do is really bring the rule of law, especially when it comes to immigration, which is one of the biggest mandates he got from the American voters, is to set that right. So he's trying to fix the issue, which has been done, should have been done by former presidents and the Congress, which they failed to do. Hence the reason we have a chaos in immigration in our country. But I'm glad President Trump and the Supreme Court sees it that way, and of course has kind of curtailed the power of the smaller courts. I think the Democrats tend to use the Constitution to their advantage. When it comes to Second Amendment, they're against it. When it comes to finding a path of rule of law and legal immigration in this nation, which is through the pathway and not creating a chaos which has been created by the Biden and the Obama administration earlier, which has led us to this stage where President Trump is realigning the immigration process in our nation. So I believe that it's the right move. It's important for us to fix our immigration. At the same time, send the criminals, most importantly, what he's also trying to achieve is send the criminals back to the countries from where they've come from. If we can't send them back to those countries, we can send them somewhere else. But get the bad element out of our communities, out of our businesses, out of our families, and make America safe again.
Right, Puneet. Puneet, thank you very much for your time. Running out of time here on Washington Watch. The story is not going to go away anytime soon. Huge implications with that ruling coming in from the Supreme Court, and we'll continue to keep tabs on that. In other news now, the week began with the US bombing Iran's nuclear facilities, but now the US is aiming for talks with Iran. Iran's foreign minister, though, has put an spanner in the works, saying that no immediate negotiations are on the table as of now. Meanwhile, a ceasefire brokered by President Trump between Iran and Israel continues to hold. Israel's attack has left Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile programs damaged, but Tehran's regime continues to stand. As far as the path ahead, President Trump had earlier said that talks with Tehran are possible as early as next week, but Iran says that's certainly not the case.
I'll tell you what, look, we're going to talk to them next week with Iran. We may sign an agreement. I don't know. To me, I don't think it's that necessary. I mean, they had a war, they fought. Now they're going back to their world. I don't care if I have an agreement or not.
نه هیچ توافقی الان برای شروع مجدد مذاکره صورت نگرفت. من به صراحت عرض می‌کنم نه قراری گذاشته شده، نه قولی گذاشته شده، نه اصلا صحبتی ما کردیم برای شروع مجدد مذاکره.
All right, let's get you more on what's next between the United States and Iran. We're joined by Nicholas Hopton, who has served as British ambassador to Iran and other Middle East countries. Ambassador Hopton, thank you very much for your time here on Washington Watch. Now, if these talks happen, I understand that Iran, of course, clearly saying, as we mentioned earlier, that these talks are not likely, at least not next week, but Trump saying otherwise. So if these talks were to happen, who would exactly have the upper hand?
Well, obviously the US is in a very strong position. The Iranians welcomed the ceasefire. I think they were in a position where the conflict was not going their way. And maybe on the Israeli side, the ceasefire was slightly less welcome because they hadn't achieved any of the stated objectives that Prime Minister Netanyahu had set out for the Israeli action. I think the US, having brokered that ceasefire, having with Qatari help, obviously, and others helping to create that choreographed denouement, which allowed both sides to accept a ceasefire on Monday night. Well, I think the US is in a strong position. But at the same time, the Iranians will feel that they still have enough to negotiate with.
Ambassador Hopton, CNN source-based report says that the US is offering several incentives so Iran does negotiate, for example, a civilian nuclear program for energy usage that could be funded by Arab countries. There's also talk of the US easing sanctions. In your opinion, what's going to really do it for Tehran to come to the table?
Well, the primary objective for the Islamic regime is always its own survival. So negotiating a deal which will be achieved between the US and the Islamic Republic essentially gives some support to the existence of the continued existence of the Islamic Republic. So that's one incentive. A further incentive is, of course, it removes the immediate threat of a resumption of hostilities. And we saw how the Israeli and then with the US support side was so much stronger than anything the Iranians could put together. And they in Tehran and in Iran, I think Iranians have been a bit shocked by the vulnerability and the weakness of their lack of air defenses, and their military might was seen to be a bit of a paper tiger in comparison to the might of Israel and the US. So I think the Iranians will be looking for a deal which supports the continued existence of the regime. They will be prepared to pay a price for that, I would imagine. And of course, they will want to see an easing of sanctions, which will allow their economy to develop again, to trade with not only with those countries like China, to whom they're selling already a lot of oil, but with other countries in Asia, Europe, and possibly, if the deal develops in the way it seemed to be shaping up to before this latest conflict, there might be the lifting of primary sanctions in the US if President Trump is able to get that through the US Congress.
Right, now you've been a diplomat in the Middle East for several years. The question here is, who is really best placed to bring about lasting or at least some sort of stability in the region at this point in time?
Well, I think the US has just demonstrated that they do. They remain the world's only real superpower. They do need to work well with their partners, and that hasn't always been the case under President Trump's administration. But I'm very pleased to see the outcome of the NATO summit this week, which seems to demonstrate renewed US engagement with its closest partners, including the United Kingdom. And my hope is that this now is the beginning of a new phase where we'll see a much more cooperative partnership approach coming out of the White House than we have seen at times, perhaps over the last few months, less confrontational, more facing challenges together, including in the Middle East. But at the end of the day, we need US leadership, strong, consistent US leadership. And I think countries in the Middle East would welcome that too, so that we can stabilize the region. And that will be good for the people of the Middle East, all the countries there, but also for the rest of the world as well.
Nicholas Hopton, thank you very much indeed. That was the former ambassador to Iran from the United Kingdom. Now, an uproar over the exact damage on Iran's nuclear capabilities continues. A leaked intelligence report from the Pentagon says that the US bombing of 3 key Iranian nuclear sites did not go far enough. It says that the damage caused only puts back Iran's nuclear program by months. President Trump says it's been put back by decades. Now, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard and CIA head John Ratcliffe say that the targeted sites have been destroyed. A similar sentiment echoed by the US Secretary of Defense as well. Now, in related news, President Trump came down hard on media outlets that ran stories about a leaked Pentagon report which said that US military action only set back Iran's nuclear program by a few months. Trump has insisted, like we mentioned, that it's been obliterated.
They flew 36 hours through enemy skies, dropped bunker busters on Iran's nuclear sites, and returned home to headlines questioning their mission's success. That's what got US President Donald Trump fired up this week.
I just want to thank our pilots. You know, they were maligned and treated very bad, demeaned by fake news.
On his Truth Social, Trump went ballistic, defending the pilots, slamming the Western media, and accusing them of trying to undercut a mission he calls legendary.
It was CNN, it was the New York Times, and they're both disgusting, really horrible groups of people.
He claims CNN and the New York Times lied and totally misrepresented the facts just to demean him.
CNN, which is back there, believe it or not, wasting time. And the New York Times, they put out a story that, well, maybe they were hit, but it wasn't bad. Well, it was so bad that they ended the war. It ended the war.
But behind Trump's anger lies another brewing storm, an intelligence report leak. Here's the rub. Leaked assessments suggest the strikes only temporarily set back Iran's nuclear program, despite more than a dozen precision-guided bunker busters. CNN reported that key centrifuges and enriched uranium may have been moved before impact.
They want to spin it to try to make him look bad based on a leak. So if you want to make an assessment of what happened at Fordo, you better get a big shovel and go really deep, because Iran's nuclear program is obliterated. Those that dropped the bombs precisely in the right place know exactly what happened when that exploded.
U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth confirmed an internal probe is underway to trace the source of a leaked Pentagon report, one that questions just how effective the Iran strikes really were. From Secretary of State Marco Rubio to Intel Chief Tulsi Gabbard to Middle East Envoy Steve Witkoff, Team MAGA is calling it media propaganda. Still, intelligence insiders caution Iran's nuclear rebuild may only be months, not years away. For now, the battle over the truth is just as fierce as the one in the skies over Iran. Rhythm Arcadia's report for NDTV World.
Let's try and get you more on that pressing question. What exactly has been the damage of Iran's nuclear capabilities? U.S. Congressman Ami Bera is a member of the U.S. House Intelligence Committee. He sat down with NDTV for an exclusive interview. Leaked intelligence reports from the Pentagon say that the strikes by the United States military was not as successful as portrayed. President Trump insists that Iran's nuclear program has been obliterated, put back by several decades, but that leak report in fact says that it's just been put back a few years. Which version are you buying?
Well, so I think this is why it's important for the administration to come to Congress, to the full Congress, House and Senate, and explain their side of things, the information that they have, what they're looking at. Obviously, I'm on the Intelligence Committee, so I have access to information that others don't have, so I won't go into details here. It's somewhere in between there. I do think there was some effectiveness on the strikes, but if the real effectiveness is getting around to the negotiating table, if the ceasefire can hold, then perhaps it's irrelevant how far back the program was set, but rather have we created the context for negotiation.
If you're saying that we're somewhere in between, are we then likely to see further military action from the United States?
These are all questions that we have for President Trump, for his administration. What's the strategy here? Again, if the strategy was to do some direct strikes, whether it was set back months or years, I don't think it was set back decades, let's put it that way. If the goal, though, was to get around to the negotiating table, then it may still effectively achieve what you set out to do. So, I mean, this is a tenuous ceasefire. Both Iran and Israel are declaring victory. At this juncture, let's broker, perhaps with some of the Gulf states, a conversation, a negotiation. I know the Qataris are doing some negotiation as well. Again, is there a possibility for a long-term solution in the Middle East?
We've also heard reports about how Iran may have potentially moved its enriched uranium to a safe location, also centrifuges, equipment needed to make their nuclear weapon. So if that's the scenario, then wouldn't it logically be a case where the United States might need to pursue further military action?
You know, again, I think those are all questions that if there's going to be additional military action, I do think the president has to come to Congress, right? You know, we have the War Powers Act. Is there unless there's an imminent threat to the United States, which right now it does not seem there's an imminent threat to the United States or our personnel, then we do think the president needs to come to Congress and we need to give them those authorizations.
US Democratic Congressman Ami Bera there talking to NDTV. And before we wrap up, let's get you this last story. It was a handshake showdown, and perhaps for once, Donald Trump didn't have the upper hand. Known for his assertive grip, the US president met his match with the Dutch king. The monarch offered a 10-second-long power shake mirroring Trump's own signature move. The moment's gone viral, with many calling it the ultimate handshake reversal. And that's all we have time for here on Washington Watch. Thank you for your company.
Air fryer. It fries using air.
Everybody's looking for that something.
Britain. What you buy is your business. Helping you pay less interest is ours.
You know how much that means. You found that special thing.
Air fryer.
You're flying with that wind.
Barclaycard. Make money work for you.
Not again, Leah. We can't watch the game without any walkers.
I got an idea.
Hola, hola, hola.
Do you mind if we watch the game we use?
Pero una cosa, tiene walkers. Hay walker. You do have some pickled eggs.
Pickled eggs ain't really for me. Is that your thing?
No walker, no egg.
Have you got any Walker's crisps? Anyone? Walkers?
Quedamos acá.
John from work said it's a lovely hike.
Right, Rosie, can I have the boots bag? No, I meant the hiking boots bag. Did we not bring it?
With up to half price at Boots, that's your summer sorted.
Witness the fitness, the clock will tell 11. One hope, one quest.
Tomorrow starts tonight. IKEA, the wonderful everyday.
Vista Health means fast access to scans. Vista Health means rapid results. Vista Health means convenient locations. Vista Health means affordable pricing. At Vista Health, we know what your health means to you. And that's why we provide fast access to MRI, ultrasound, echocardiogram and other health scans, without the need for a referral or medical insurance. Get the answers you need. Book your scan today at vistahealth.co.uk.
The UK's first human heart transplant has been completed, supported by the British Heart Foundation.
We were a noisy generation, but it might be something quiet we do that becomes our greatest legacy. Leave a gift in your will to the British Heart Foundation and fund groundbreaking research that could help save millions of lives. Search BHF Wills.
Play tombola.
Yes! I found £11! All right, calm down. It's just a bit of bingo.
Open for fun.
3, 2, 1, go!
Right, come on.
Guys.
Add some play with National Lottery scratch cards.
Epic deals this summer at Currys. Save up to £250 on these sleek 10-kilo LG washing machines from $419. Or trade up to the 13-kilo for £80 more with free recycling. Great savings and free recycling on high-air fridge freezers. Save £200 on this 3-door model, now only $499. And get £200 off selected LG OLED TVs when bought with a Sony PS5 Slim, digital or disc console. At Currys.
Guess who's coming to dinner with Felix? Robbie Williams.
Cats do what they want when they want to. Don't feel any need to impress you.
Dinner!
Live like your Felix. It's great to be a cat.
Purina.
Potentially limiting automatic citizenship for children born in the United States to non-citizen parents. Next on the show, a big NDTV exclusive. It's on Op Sindoor. The Navy stopped short of launching an attack on identified targets. This included Pakistan Navy ships and submarines in harbour and land-based targets as well. We'll share those details with you and discuss this. It's Shubhanshu Shukla's first day at the International Space Station. We speak to leading experts on his mission and what it means for India's space program. And finally, the brilliant analyst Ian Bremmer joins me as we discuss at length the situation in West Asia. Is there a winner or loser between Israel and Iran? All that and a lot more. First, the headlines. A shocker in Kolkata. A woman has been raped inside a college campus. All 3 accused have been arrested. The Trinamool Congress under fire. Is the accused the Trinamool Congress leader? The party distances itself. The Kolkata horror. NDTV accesses the victim's complaint. The accused threatened to kill me and my boyfriend, was raped in the guard room, blackmailed with videos, is what it says. The Parliamentary Standing Committee on Transport and Tourism summons the Civil Aviation Secretary to discuss aviation safety concerns in India. In a big win for the Trump administration, the US Supreme Court has limited the use of nationwide injunctions, reining in federal judges and their ability to issue sweeping orders against presidential actions. Furthermore, the Supreme Court said it will allow the Trump administration to partially enforce an executive order that seeks to end birthright citizenship, where proceedings in a challenge to the directive move forward. This allows President Trump to end birthright citizenship in some parts of the country, which means if you were born in America, you get American citizenship. Your parents may not be American, but if you were born in America, you become American at birth. Now, this is a partial ban. It will not take effect for the next 30 days. What exactly is the impact on this? I'm joined by NDTV's Tony Waterman. Tony, thank you very much for being with us. In simple terms, what does this mean?
Well, it's important to remember that this is not a ruling on birthright citizenship in and of itself. It is far more narrow than that. In this 6-3 ruling, the justices said that the lower courts, specifically individual judges, cannot issue these nationwide injunctions blocking an executive order from the president. So if a single judge somewhere in the United States does issue an injunction, then that injunction is now only going to apply to the states, groups, and individuals that sued. So not the entire country, as we have has been common practice here in the United States for a very, very long time. So this means that it opens the door for Trump's birthright citizenship proposal, which he is trying to ban this automatic citizenship for certain individuals who are born in the United States. There's the potential now that this could start to move forward. And we know that there are 21 states in the U.S. that would support this type of restriction on birthright citizenship. They're essentially the very conservative states that have also banned abortion access for women in their states. The liberal justices have issued a very scathing dissent from this decision. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson saying that the decision is an existential threat to the rule of law in the United States. Justice Sonia Sotomayor saying that no right is safe in the new legal regime the court creates. This really opens a Pandora's box when it comes to the way the legal system works in the United States, but also the power that the president has.
Yeah. All right, Tony, thank you very much for joining us. Let's see where this is all headed and whether there will be restrictions on citizenship at birth. That's a matter of huge concern. Thanks very much indeed. Well, we're going to move on now to another one of our big stories. And what we're essentially looking at is a big NDTV exclusive report, and that has to do with Op Sindoor. It's a story which I was able to access, and the big point is this. At the height of Operation Sindoor, Indian Navy ships and submarines were given target coordinates. In fact, they may have been minutes away or moments away from firing. The fleet was told to stand by, and an order to open fire could have been moments away. On more than one occasion, the Indian Navy's ships were put on hot standby. In other words, they were locked and loaded, and the targets that the Navy was looking at were, besides anything else, ships and submarines of the Pakistan Navy, which were docked, for example, at Karachi port. We would have hit them using land attack cruise missiles fired from submarines and BrahMos cruise missiles fired from warships. It got really close because, as I said, on more than one occasion, right, the Navy was on the verge of opening fire. And that aircraft that you see on your screen over there, briefly, which you saw, a variant of the ATR, it's a common civilian aircraft. A couple of days after hostilities between India and Pakistan stopped, there was one of those ATR aircraft which actually ventured out towards India's fleet, which was still deployed. And one of these aircraft, a MiG-29K from the INS Vikrant, formatted right close to it, a few hundred meters away, a short distance away, forcing that Pakistani maritime surveillance aircraft to actually move out. That's what I'm talking about. This, of course, is a file picture, but it was among or possibly the first occasion where the Pakistani Navy was trying to test or probe the Indian Navy. This happened shortly after the hostilities ended, but Indian Navy MiG-29Ks off the INS Vikrant sort of drove that away. Now, you can ask, where was the Pakistani Navy throughout Op Sindoor? Well, they didn't come out to play. They were entirely bottled up. The Indian Navy qualitatively and quantitatively ahead of the Pakistan Navy. But the detail that we've now been able to actually get is that on more than one occasion, the Indian Navy, right, stood down after being put on a hot standby to take out targets, which included submarines and warships of the Pakistan Navy at dock, at port, in addition to military targets. So it would have been absolutely massive. The reason they didn't do this is because in the escalation matrix, using naval power is in fact something which is higher, and perhaps the government didn't want to do this. Vice Admiral Anup Singh joins us at this stage. Vice Admiral, good to speak to you. Based on this information, which is confirmed, corroborated, and reported by me personally, how close do you believe things actually got for the Indian Navy at the height of Operation Sindoor?
Thank you for having me on your show, Vishnu. As close as you just said, and as close as you mentioned in your article. Basically, the Indian Navy, as most reckonable navies of the world, are supposed to be a silent service. So the powder was kept dry, and you're absolutely right. The Pakistan Navy did not have, as it did not have in 1971, any option but to remain bottled up.
And sir, this also speaks about carrier aviation, not just in terms of formatting with that Pakistani Navy ATR, which happened a few days after hostilities ended, but the fact that we used our aircraft carrier, right, one of the two that we have, to maintain complete air dominance south of the Pakistani coastline is critical and is an example of exactly why the Navy wants aircraft carriers, right?
Absolutely right. And that's why we've been fighting for a long time for 3 aircraft carriers at least, so that if one is under maintenance, as it would be, you should have at least 2 operational, one for each seaboard. And we have the 2nd largest peninsula in the world. We have open sea lanes. We have to protect our shipping. One has to remember that 40% of our GDP comes from the sea because of the sea, because all our trade of commodities and products, including hydrocarbons, comes only by the sea.
Right. And Admiral, if the Indian Navy were to have attacked Karachi port itself, we could have ended up sinking a large number of Pakistani Navy ships and submarines, docked over there. In other words, a navy which never came out to play, in a sense, could have been taken out in the port itself, given the firepower that we enjoy, not just from the BrahMos, but submarine-launched cruise missiles as well.
Absolutely, Vishnu. Despite having some legacy platforms in our subsurface stable, that is our submarines, particularly the Kilo class, which are on their last legs, having gone through many upgrades and many medium refits. Despite that, you'll appreciate the fact that because of temperature, salinity, humidity in the Indian Ocean, which is the worst out of all the oceans in the world, 1/3 of a surface or subsurface post is always under maintenance. That still leaves a large number of submarines available for operations. And the other thing one has to remember is that, unfortunately, Pakistan is stuck with only a Makran coast of about 470 nautical miles, plus an armpit, as I call it, Karachi and Qasim. Unlike India, which has nearly 200 ports, out of which 60 are fully operational.
Right. Admiral, you've seen the evolution of the Indian Navy. When we've got missiles like the BrahMos in our arsenal, what does it actually mean, not just in terms of landing, not just in terms of targeting land targets, but also ships? What does that capability mean for us?
It's huge. It's huge in comparison to anything else in the world, because we were perhaps one of the first ones to have a supersonic, and that at Mark III cruise missile. And you know, today we don't talk of 300 kilometers and limited